To WTIM, your information station, and our morning show. It's brought to you by People's Bank and Trust, where they put people first, and Landmark of Taylorville. I'm your host, Grayson Bauman, and joining us in this segment, we've got Dr. Kent Redfield. And Dr. Redfield is a professor emeritus of political science with the University of Illinois Springfield. Dr. Redfield, good morning to you, sir. How are you?
Just fine, just fine.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. And hopefully, with all these talks about the veto session, we're going to pick up right there here today as well. And to start, you're the perfect guy to ask this, but what roughly is a veto session for our listeners? How does it come about, and what can you make of the situation right now that, or maybe did just wrap up last week on the Capitol? But Dr. Redfield, what can you tell us about the veto session?
Well, in Illinois, we gave, in the 1970 Constitution, we gave the governor really, really strong veto powers. On a subsidy bill, he can sign it or veto it, but he can also offer an amendatory veto, which then comes back to the legislature, and they need a 60% majority to override a veto, but they only need a 50% vote to accept the governor's changes. So it really gives the governor a lot of leverage to say, normally a legislature says, here's the final version, take it or leave it. And in Illinois, the governor can say, well, here's another version. And, you can have this one with just a simple majority, or, if you want your original bill, you got to go back and get, 60 votes. So in the House, and 60% vote in the House and the Senate. So we've got this, we've institutionalized a process where any vetoes that are issued when the legislature is not in session, they're held at the Secretary of State's office, and they go to the legislature when they're back in session. So when they adjourned in the spring, in early June, I think it was, then, they set a date, and these were, 2 weeks in the month of October where they would consider vetoes. And the governor also has extraordinary powers on appropriation bills. He can sign them or veto them, but he can also reduce an appropriation so that instead of $200,000 for a program, he could say, I want this to be, only $100,000 because I'm trying to save money. Or he could do a line item veto where you've got a big agency budget and it has lots of moving parts, and he can go in and single out an individual program and do a line item veto. When he does that, the rest of the bill becomes law. It's just those things that he's objected to that come back to the legislature. And again, the legislature has can try to overturn those, the line item and the reduction vetoes, but you don't get into he doesn't have to veto the whole bill in order to make changes. But when the legislature's in town, it's also a legislature. And that gets us to the fall, it being a fall legislative session. So there are things on the agenda right now that were not resolved in the spring, that if they can work agreements, then they can, put a bill on the governor's desk. Hopefully it's been agreed to deal with a problem that they couldn't find a solution for in the spring. So we're in the last 3 days, starting tomorrow, of the fall session. Everything's going to start all over again, when they come back in January. But it'll be, a session where they're also dealing with, the primary elections for the, partisan primary elections. So we'll see what happens.
Well, we'll probably be doing a lot of seeing. I know I was thinking last week was maybe the wrap up of it, but you've mentioned to us that Tuesday through probably Thursday, then this week is when the actual veto session will wrap up. There were two things that you mentioned there near the beginning that kind of stood out to me. So they need only a 50% vote to actually accept, but they need 60% vote to actually overturn. So that kind of struck me as a bit odd. I guess you need a majority vote, and then you need actually nearing 2/3 of the vote.
Yeah.
How does that kind of compare to other states and powers that the governor has?
It's not. Most states don't have this extraordinary veto power for the governor, but a number of them do, and It is just, it changes the dynamic to give the governor some extra leverage. And so what he's saying, you say you've got a bill doing, making some changes with oversight of insurance, which is something that the legislature's been talking about with all the increases in homeowners. He can come back and say, well, I don't think you had it exactly right. So here's my suggested changes. And then you put normal majorities on it. And with that, that'll become law. But if you want your original bill, you've got to come up with enough votes to reject the amendatory veto and restore the original bill. And it's to a less, it's kind of the same dynamic with appropriations. It's, it isn't kind of, when the president gets a bill to fund the Department of Interior, he can either sign it or he can veto it. He can't suggest changes. He can go back and maybe, negotiate later, but he doesn't really have any leverage in terms of, it's up or down. Whereas when we make, we send the governor the budget on education, he can put in an amendatory veto he can never add money, but he can take money out. And that gives him some additional leverage of shaping the final product.
Okay. Well, I definitely appreciate a little bit more breakdown on that in terms of the fall veto session and maybe some of those major topics, some of those big things that you're seeing discussion swirling around. What might some of those be for our listeners? What are the big takeaways that you're seeing so far from the fall veto session?
Yeah. Well, the biggest deal, and obviously not a big deal in downstate Illinois, involves mass transit in northeastern Illinois. And so there was a lot of funding in all of the COVID legislation to provide additional money for transportation, particularly mass transit, when you were dealing with all of the COVID restrictions and everything. That money is going away. You've got problems with declines in the ridership, and so there are real fiscal problems coming. And on top of that, you've got a system that has basically buses operating in the suburban areas and a couple of different configurations there, whether it's Cook County or the surrounding counties. And then in the city of Chicago and throughout Cook County, you've got trains that are coming in, the Chicago Transit Authority, the primary one. And so you've got these different entities, and then the Regional Transit Authority is over, supervises all of this, supposedly provides the coordination. And so this is a fiscal problem, but people are all saying, we could also make this much more efficient and effective if we change the powers of the boards, got more oversight, less oversight. Becomes a very complicated issue. It may be off the table because they now think they can squeak by without putting more money into the current fiscal year, which ends next June. And so, they may be able to kick the can down the road. But eventually they're going to have more money that might involve fare increases, might involve taxes that may or may not be directly related to transportation. And the people that want to see reform in terms of coordination and control, they're trying to hold out for their changes. So that's the most serious and the most complicated thing that they may take up. Other things are a lot easier. The Bears would like money to help them move to Arlington, and the governor and the two Democratic leaders of the House and the Senate and most of the Chicago legislators are at this point not inclined to give the Bears additional support to move the Bears out of Chicago and out to Arlington and build a new stadium. So that one's maybe a little easier to predict what's going to happen.
Okay, well, I can tell you after the Bears game yesterday, I don't know if they deserve a new stadium, but I digress.
Fair enough.
Yeah, how do you lose to a backup quarterback? I don't know. Anyway, the mass transit, though, I think is the biggest deal, right? When it comes to
Yes.
the CTA, PACE, Metro, and you mentioned to us also like the Regional Transit Authority, kind of the coordinating agency for all of those. My question to you is that the proposed tax or the idea of it for $1.50 on every delivery to your home or small business or whatever the case might be, that is being tacked with it. That looks like likely going to be pushed down the road. You mentioned kind of kicking the can down the road. Do you think that is what will happen with this?
Yeah, I think it's the closer you get to an election, and we got people that are going to be in contested primaries next March, the harder it is to pass, revenue. And when it's revenue that is kind of a general tax on everybody for a much narrow purpose, mass transit and northeastern Illinois, even though Illinois is very, very dependent on its on its whole transportation system. That's one of our big pluses, is the fact that we have we're in the middle of the country, and we benefit from all of the transportation activity that takes place within the state of Illinois. So, there is a general benefit from keeping these mass transit systems healthy, as well as our regular transportation systems healthy. But anytime it's, you're asking someone in downstate Illinois to, pay a little extra money to support a program that doesn't have a lot of impact, or what they see as a lot of impact, in their area, that's a pretty heavy lift.
Oh yeah, that has been quite the topic of discussion, especially with that proposed $1.50 tax on all deliveries. But it just, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot going on when it comes to the veto session. And one good thing of note, I guess, is that it will be kicked down the road. But you mentioned, kind of passing bills or passing things that generate revenue, and maybe holding off on those as you're seeking election or re-election. So just kind of funny to me where it's one of those deals again. It's give me another 4 years and I'll get this straightened out. I will do so. So joining us right now, we have Dr. Kent Redfield, Professor Emeritus of Political Science with the University of Illinois Springfield, and we'll be right back around with him. We might wrap up our conversation about the fall veto session, but we've got more coming for you as well. You're listening to WTIM, your information station.
Your information station, WTIM.
The Taylorville Tornadoes are on WTIM. Listen on air or online for all football, boys basketball, and playoff games of both teams on AM, FM, and streamed on the WTIM mobile app. Sponsored by McClure Halberg Insurance, Prairie Farms Dairy, the senior citizens of Christian County, and Taylorville Community Eye Care.
The purple and gold are coming your way. The Taylorville Tornadoes are going to do it today.
Whether you're an experienced investor or a first-time home buyer, Joe Curvey at Curvey Real Estate in Taylorville is here to help you find the property of your dreams. Here's Joe.
As a second-generation realtor and auctioneer and over 20 years of experience in Taylorville, I've seen the ins and outs of every aspect of buying and selling real estate. Year after year, we're a top producer in the area, and Curvey Real Estate has become a staple in the community, known for our longevity and exceptional customer service.
Curvey Real Estate. Experience, trust, community. Call Joe Curvey today.
Back to school fun starts at the Christian County YMCA. Reconnect with your friends in our huge indoor pool with a water slide. Rain or shine, the fun never stops. Work up a sweat in our newly renovated gymnasium, or crush your fitness goals in our fully equipped wellness center. All memberships are now month to month, no annual commitment, no worries, just total freedom to jump in and enjoy. Join the Y today and make this your best school year yet. Christian County YMCA, more than a gym, we're a community.
Taylorville Community Credit Union has an opening in its Taylorville office for a full-time teller. Duties include handling member transactions, opening new accounts, and daily balancing of their cash drawer. Pay range is $16.50 to $18 per hour. Benefits include health, dental, vision, life, and long-term disability insurance, as well as 401k, paid time off, and paid holidays. Mail or deliver your resume to Attention Michelle, Taylorville Community Credit Union, 422 West Main Cross, Taylorville, Illinois, 62568. Equal Opportunity Employer. Member NCUA.
This is Dwayne Wheeler, the police chief of the city of Taylorville. As a law enforcement officer, I've seen the impact that depression and suicide have on many people. Many times, those contemplating suicide endure considerable suffering and distress, but there is help. If you feel depressed or lonely, there are many resources to help you. You can call a trusted relative, friend, or minister, or call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. That is 1-800-273-TALK. All of us are here to help you. Thank you.
The Christian County Health Department has both COVID and flu vaccines available, with both high-dose and regular dose flu vaccines in stock. Call and make your appointment now. Get their number and more info by clicking their icon at TaylorvilleDailyNews.com.
Here's Dr. Pavi Gill from Springfield Clinic, Taylorville.
Lifestyle medicine is about motivating you to improve your quality of life by changing habits and behaviors.
Find out more by clicking Dr. Gill's icon at TaylorvilleDailyNews.com.
Your information station, WTIM.
And we're back with more of the WTIM Morning Show here on your information station, and brought to you by People's Bank and Trust, where they put people first, and Landmark of Taylorville. Joining us now, we have Dr. Kent Redfield, Professor Emeritus of Political Science with the University of Illinois Springfield. We talked the fall veto session in that first segment. We'd like to turn our attention now to ICE and the National Guard potentially in Chicago. This has been a topic of conversation for a little while now. And Dr. Redfield, where does it sit at this moment?
Well, we still have protests going on, and we still have the Trump administration wants to pursue bringing federalizing National Guard and bringing them into the situation in Chicago. So it really is at a standstill. You've had some local action where, the Broadview is a community outside of Chicago where there's a detention facility, lots of protests going on. And, the mayor of Broadview has created a designated protest zone. So you're trying to keep the activities, out of the street in a particular area across the street. That's kind of these are executive orders. The Cook County Chief Judge and the County Board President have issued some executive orders trying to restrict ICE and Border Patrol activities from making civil arrests in county courthouses, operating in, on county property, county-owned building, parking lots. The mayor of Chicago's gotten involved, trying to bar action from schools, libraries, parks. These are all, kind of local orders, except for one federal issue, judge ordering, trying to restrict use of tear gas. And, we don't know how that's, what's going to happen in terms of kind of the being able to regulate the protests and put limitations on the responses that you get from ICE and the Border Patrol. The other thing, again, at a standstill, is whether or not you're going to be able to nationalize the National Guard and bring them into the city for either involve protecting federal operations and facilities or for basic crime control kinds of things like we're doing in Washington, D.C. You've got the circuit in the federal circuit around in Portland has ruled that the president does have the authority to bring the National Guard in. Circuit Court in Illinois, a federal judge, and then a circuit court has ruled the president does not have a general authority to bring nationalize the Guard and bring it in, particularly broad-based kind of fighting crime as opposed to protecting, personnel and facilities for federal action, like again, ICE. And that's, those are, that's where we're at, and it really hasn't changed in the last week. We're waiting on the courts.
Waiting on the courts, and I have a feeling we probably will continue to do so here. Well, Dr. Redfield, thank you as always for coming with as much as you have today, and for just joining us here on the show.
Oh, always a pleasure.
Always. Well, thank you so much. Dr. Kent Redfield, Professor Emeritus of Political Science with the University of Illinois Springfield, here on WTIM, your information station.